Hello. Today we explore Fort St. George, a sprawling complex in Chennai, India, the headquarters of the British East India Company and then the headquarters of the British Raj in the Indian subcontinent. In the 1500s, India was a target for many European explorers because of its known riches. Vasco da Gama established a sea route to the west coast of India in 1498, but other Portuguese explorers targeted the east coast. The Portuguese arrived in Chennai in 1522 and called the city Sao Tome. In 1609, the Dutch and the Danish both arrived and set up headquarters and fortresses in Pulicat and Tarangambari. In 1639, the British set up headquarters in Fort St. George, Chennai, and would remain there for a while. The British gradually expanded their control of the Indian subcontinent, and in 1858, control of Fort St. George was transferred from the East India Company to the British Crown. This remained in effect till 1947, when Indian independence was achieved. At the entrance to Fort St. George is a granite cupola to Lord Charles Cornwallis, Governor-General at Fort St. George from 1789 to 1794. He was most well known for his loss to George Washington in 1781 in the Battle of Yorktown. Fort St. George now houses the offices for the state of Tamil Nadu, including the Chief Minister's office, and during the daytime is a busy hub of activity for the state. You get a sense of a typical government area, but there's also barracks from the old British times that are now repurposed into government offices. There's still a retained sense of the grandeur that the fort must once have been during the 16 and 1700s. Two of the areas we visited within the complex were the Fort St. George Museum and St. Mary's Church, both with a lot of historical significance. As you first step into the museum, there's a display of a model of Fort St. George as it was likely during British times. There was a moat surrounding the entire area, and the fort itself was close to the Bay of Bengal, whereas now there's a little bit more built-up land separating the bay from the fort. And here in the main stairwell of the museum is the statue of Lord Cornwallis that was inside the granite cupola that's at the main entrance of the museum. The museum is a treasure trove for fans of the colonial period of India. There are numerous weapons and armor worn by many kingdoms in the area, including both Hindu and Muslim kings. There's weapons that were used by the British themselves. There's also uniforms that the British soldiers and British police and officials used in those days, and even the actual locks and keys to Fort St. George. Metal coins excavated or otherwise retrieved from the region tell a story of the rich history of the Chennai area, with coins from Tipu Sultan, Portuguese time, English times, and various other kingdoms from the area. It was fascinating to see pottery from Beatrix Potter from English colonial times. My wife grew up with some Beatrix Potter pottery, as did our children when they were growing up. The displayed pottery gives a sense of the lifestyles of the English colonial leaders, as well as the Nawabs and other rulers of the region at the time. It was fascinating to learn of how the history of Elihu Yale, the founder of Yale College, and the East India Company was closely intertwined. Elihu came to Madras in 1671 and became president of Fort St. George. In 1680, he married the widow of the acting governor of Madras and acquired a lot of wealth. He used this wealth to further his own trade in gems and possibly in the slave trade. Elihu was eventually dismissed from the East India Company for private trading while working for the company, but got himself exonerated. He returned to England a very wealthy man, but with a craving to establish a respectable reputation. Meanwhile, a gentleman named Cotton Mather had established Connecticut College in 1701 to rival Harvard University, where his father had been ousted from the board. He needed money to keep the college running and expanding. Elihu Yale gave him a huge donation and got Yale University, one of the best institutions in the world, named after him. There's a silver platter from Elihu Yale's family collection dated 1687 that is on display at the Fort St. George Museum. Just around the corner from the Fort St. George Museum is St. Mary's Church, the oldest British building in India, sometimes known as Westminster Abbey of the East. There was a Catholic church initially on the same site, but that was demolished when the English took power, and they built this Anglican church instead. Construction started in 1678 with the help of donations from soldiers and officers, and was completed by 1680. The chief architect of the church was a gunner with the British Army, which might explain the unusual construction of the building. The walls and the roof are 4 feet thick, and it is said that cannonballs would bounce off of the convex roof of the church. The church was built with 3 aisles and a nave with a Raphael painting, and remains a well-maintained and peaceful place. In the back of the church is a baptismal font that has been used since 1680. The font is made of black Pallavaram granite, obtained locally. A number of famous Englishmen were married in this church, including Elihu Yale, after whom Yale College is named, and also Robert Clive, also known as Clive of India, who was a leader of the East India Company. With the museum, St. Mary's Church, and a number of other smaller sites within the Fort St. George complex, I think you'll find your overall visit to the area very rewarding and a deep dive into English colonial history. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a comment. I love hearing from you. And feel free to watch some of the other videos exploring ancient South Indian history.